Hi everybody, Todd here, and I hope you're having a great week. Today I'm going to take a look at outboard preamps and what makes them different from the ones that are built into audio interfaces. We'll also look at who they're for and why you might want to have one. So let's talk about it. Now, most audio interfaces like this Focusrite Scarlett 4i4 will have built-in microphone preamps. In fact, mic preamps, we've got line level connection, as well as a DI or instrument input that allows us to hook up an electric guitar or bass. And so you might ask, well, if that's the case, why would we need something like this ISA1 external preamp? It's a lot bulkier, it's a lot heavier, seems to have more controls on it than the entire audio interface, so there must be a reason. And I have a number of other outboard preamps and channel strips in the rack beside me, plus others in the studio. In fact, right now you're listening to me on the SM7B connected into a Universal Audio 710 Twinfinity preamp. And that's actually connected into an ART voice channel, not for the preamp, but for the EQ, compression, de-essing, expansion. So I have an analog signal chain, and I've chosen to do that because there's a certain character and tone I want to impart on the microphone, and I don't plan on going back and doing a lot of post-processing after I finish recording this video. But I could have just gone ahead and connected the microphone into one of the preamps on my audio interface, and then applied some processing with plugins later on to get the sound I want. Now, one of the most common ways people will describe the difference between the two is they'll say the preamps in your audio interface tend to be more transparent versus the ones in the outboard gear. And this can be the case. Audio interfaces typically have solid-state circuitry. It's designed to pass the signal through, boost it, but not necessarily change it. Outboard gear is often made with transformers and tubes, capacitors, diodes, other circuitry that will impart a color on the sound. Now, looking at a Scarlett 4i4 and an ISA1 outboard preamp side by side, we can see significant differences here. Keep in mind also the 4i4 has two mic preamps as well as instrument inputs. It has multiple outputs and it's an audio interface. The ISA1 is a single channel mic preamp with DI, again, so instrument input, line level control. Big differences are in the circuitry, of course. The ISA1 has a transformer, it has a lot more capacitors involved inside. It has a unique feature among some of the outboard preamps in that it does have a digital expansion capability. I don't have that in my particular unit, but nonetheless, it does have that capability. But you can see a significant difference here, and that's what adds up to the difference in sound that one imparts versus the other. And another significant point of difference is really the onboard controls, where audio interfaces typically have fewer, like microphone preamp gain, monitor output, headphone output, phantom power, whereas outboard preamps typically have additional features like impedance, phase, inversion, high-pass filters, and when we get into channel strips, we start getting features like EQ, compression, and other processing features we typically expect to use in our DAW or with outboard gear. Now, having transparent preamps can be very useful, but with the demand from artists for the classic sound of gear that's been on records for decades, manufacturers have sought to find ways to add that tone into their audio interface preamps. And so some, like this Universal Audio Volt, have a vintage button that will give you the sound of their 610 preamp, one found in classic consoles, and you can still buy that as outboard gear today. Then you have manufacturers like Focusrite that have an air button on their interfaces that allow you to get that ISA1 sound without having to have the outboard gear. Now, some manufacturers take this a step further and add what's called DSP, which is essentially the ability to add plugins and run them synchronously as you're recording audio. And the idea is to be able to recreate the sound of vintage preamps and other analog gear, even microphones, while you're tracking with no latency, as opposed to processing after in post where you can add whatever you like to the signal chain. And there's been an ongoing debate as to whether plugins and analog gear are the same, whether plugins give you the same sound. I can tell you in my experience, plugins are very, very good, but they don't fully model the character of analog circuitry. And that's because when you have the interaction of various analog components, it's very difficult to mathematically model that in the digital domain. And at the time of recording, we have the interesting question as to whether or not computers have become fast enough to make DSP obsolete. We have Universal Audio about to release some new gear, and coincidentally, all of their plugins that used to run in DSP only are now becoming available to run natively on Windows and Mac. And so this combination has made a lot of us wonder whether DSP might be on the way out or whether it's just giving us a choice one way or the other. Either way, you have a lot of options available, both DSP or analog. Now, I'm not going to go into every preamp and channel strip that I have in the studio today, you want more information, reviews, and tutorials, you can check out my channel page. But what I've done is I've set up a camera in front of one of the racks in my studio where I have 3 examples of what I would call the most common types of outboard mic preamps. At the top, we have the Universal Audio 710 to Infinity. This is a 2-circuit preamp. Essentially, it has a solid state as well as a tube circuit and allows us to blend. So a little more tone shaping than just a standard preamp. It also has a high-pass filter, but it's not trying to be an EQ or a compressor. Now below it, we have the Warm Audio 73 EQ, the WA73 EQ. And it is designed to be a clone of the classic Neve 1073 preamp and inductor EQ. So if we want to get that classic Neve sound, we can get it using this outboard mic pre. Now below it, I have the ART voice channel, which is an affordable example of an all-in-one solution. It has a tube-based microphone preamp, it has a compressor, which is actually an optical Vactrol design, it has a semi-parametric EQ, a de-esser, as well as an expander gate. Plus it's 2-stage input and output, so we can have different levels of saturation. We can overdrive the tube if we want, because again, remember, this isn't only for microphones, it's for line level sources and instruments. So really 3 kind of examples of the most common use cases for outboard mic pre's. Now to give you an idea of difference in sound, since you are hearing me through the Universal Audio 710, I'm going to go ahead and switch this over. Right now we're on solid state. I'm going to switch it over to tube. And now I've turned it over to the tube mode, and so we can get a little more saturation and harmonics from having a tube preamplifier circuit instead. And of course, one of the things that's unique about this one is it allows us to blend in between. So I'll gradually back this off towards solid state, and I'll just let you listen to the difference as we move from full tube back all the way to just a solid state sound. So hopefully that translated over YouTube for you. Again, using outboard analog gear is about adding character and flexibility in some cases as well. So hopefully this gives you some ideas. So when it comes down to whether you need an outboard mic preamp or not, the simple answer could just be no. But taking a little deeper look at it, it really depends on what your workflow and what your goals are like. An outboard mic preamp can really open up a lot of possibilities to get some classic sounds, dial in a tone you really want to have. It's also useful for live broadcast, streaming, any application where you want to get that sound maybe a little closer to finished. You're not going to be able to go back and post. There's also the option of adding other analog outboard gear to create the signal chain, like what I've done today with the UA710 and the ART voice channel. But there's certainly a lot of options. You can add a mic pre and then a compressor behind it and an EQ, a de-esser. A lot of options are out there. So it really depends what you want to do. And at the end of the day, working with analog gear can also be fun, and mic pre's are no different than that. They're certainly different than what's built into the audio interface. I'm not going to get into whether one is better than the other. That's not the point of this video, but you definitely have a lot of choices, and getting a good microphone preamp can be a great way to start and get going in the analog domain. And so whether you're considering your first piece of outboard analog gear or you want to take a deeper dive into the features that are available, check out one of the videos on the screen. As always, thanks for watching. Really appreciate having you here, and I'll see you next time.